It's the week ending Friday the 30th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Israel launching a major operation in the West Bank as ceasefire talks in Cairo reach a stalemate. Sir Keir Starmer warning of a painful autumn budget in his speech from the Downing Street Rose Garden, and the Paralympic Games opening in Paris with a spectacular ceremony. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Rebecca Messina and Jamie Timson, and we also say hello again to writer and performer Suchandrika Chakrabarti. Suchandrika, are you going to be spending your weekend opening multiple browsers so you can get tickets for the Oasis reunion?
No, sorry.
Jamie?
I signed up to a ballot for them, yeah. It depends how much they cost. Isn't it going to be like 200 quid or something? And that's going to be insane. Of course it is. Yeah, it's an
They're not doing it for fun.
No. Well, they're making... barely having fun themselves, are they?
Have you got a parka that you can wear?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll go full incognito, which is what the browser that I'll need to use if I want to get tickets.
Rebecca, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Well, this is the week the free speech movement found its latest martyr.
We only know the very superficial headlines of the accusations. We don't know what the details are, but there are many situations in which social media companies and messaging systems are asked by law enforcement to shut down terrorists, pedophiles, drug dealers, etc. And if Telegram was repeatedly asked by the French government to cooperate with them on this and they refused, then I guess there is a reason for a conflict, a reason for a judicial investigation.
Human rights activist Sir Bill Browder speaking to Times Radio on Monday, talking about the social media platform Telegram there, Rebecca, whose founder has found himself in trouble with the French this week. Not exactly an underreported story, but you think perhaps not widely understood.
Yeah, and I will say, I do think the story has become significantly more reported between me saying I was going to talk about it and us now recording it. It has definitely been in the headlines. Pavel Durov was detained as he got off his private jet by French authorities and taken in for questioning. He was released on Wednesday after they'd asked for an extension in police custody. But then on Wednesday evening, he was charged basically with aiding and abetting a huge swathe of crimes, which according to French prosecutors are being perpetrated sort of with his, intangible blessing on Telegram. There are a couple of big misconceptions about Telegram and what it is and how it works.
Well, let's do the absolute 101 for people who literally still don't know anything other than it's an app.
Yeah, so the 101 is basically the biggest misconception is that Telegram is a chat messaging app that is more secret than other ones. Like it's more secret than WhatsApp. Authorities can't access it. That isn't true. We can get into that a bit more later about the kind of encryption that's used. But the basic appeal of it is not that it's more secret than other messaging apps, but kind of the fact that it functions as almost a social media app as well. There are public channels that you can use to communicate like you would on Twitter, for instance, but there are also then private messaging groups and chat features that are also used by a variety of people. And I think the other big misconception is about who uses it, because I think if you're not a user of Telegram and you're not interested in it, you've probably heard of it primarily in connection with things like terrorist plots. And while it is used for those purposes, it has almost 1 billion users. So, not all of those people are terrorists and criminals. It's widely used by politicians, including in France. Emmanuel Macron is himself a big user of Telegram, and his own party has a Telegram channel where they share information with political journalists in France. So it really is enmeshed in a lot of areas of life beyond the sort of crimey headlines that you're likely to see.
But also associated, Jamie, with Russia-Ukraine, I think. In the British public imagination, the place you've heard about it, in addition to the kind of things that Rebecca said, is you'll hear about groups in both countries organising themselves on Telegram as part of the ongoing war. And of course, Durov is Russian, isn't he? So tell us about that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. One of a kind of family friend took in Ukrainian refugees, and they're still living with them now. And the son, the boy, is maybe 19 or something. That was kind of my first introduction with Telegram, was that he would use it to talk to his friends back home in Ukraine, and they would share things in groups. I mean, the big difference between WhatsApp and Telegram is that WhatsApp limit the size of the groups to 1,000 users, which is even too many, if you ask me, WhatsApp chat-wise. Whereas Telegrams now can have groups up to 200,000. So there is a lot of sharing of information that goes on. In the UK as well, I think potentially we know about it through the most recent riots, because there were far-right channels on the app that were being used to potentially organize the disorder. But yeah, Durov is an interesting character because he was originally from Russia. He's a multi-billionaire. He left Russia in 2014 because he refused to comply with government demands to shut down opposition communities on the platform. But The Guardian that reported on kind of leaked border data that showed that Durov actually went back to Russia quite a few times in between 2015 and 2021. So there is a question mark over how much involvement the Kremlin has in what Durov kind of puts forward. I think the main thing I would like to point out is that there's very little content moderation. Durov said it recently in an interview with the Financial Times that there was actually only about 30 engineers working on the app itself. So whereas if you think about places like X and WhatsApp and Instagram, that content moderation is a massive part of what they do.
Is it? Can you just outline that for me? Because actually I don't understand this. I saw when he was arrested, people saying, oh, there aren't enough moderators on Telegram, and that's the issue. And I was thinking, well, what moderators are there on WhatsApp? I know there's people who are trying to sell me ads through it, and I know there's people in tech support. But when I send a message, who's moderating that? I thought it was encrypted end to end.
Yeah, I think that the argument is content moderation. They say at least there's a kind of backdoor for the US government that it basically allows the US government access to things that are put onto WhatsApp so that we are
Who
able
says?
to.
WhatsApp don't say that, do they?
No.
That's not the official line.
These are like privacy campaigners and also people
Right.
that want to use Telegram and Signal. I think the problem comes when you talk about the difference between X and Instagram, which are obviously public-facing platforms.
Sure.
It's about what content we put on public-facing platforms. But the thing about Telegram and potentially WhatsApp are that these are like private message systems, effectively. And it's a lot, obviously, as you're pointing out, it's a lot harder to do content moderation. But WhatsApp moderators can read your messages. That is true in order to comply with a lot of the laws. They do exist.
So is that what the French want, Suchandrika? They want Telegram to implement opportunities for backdoor access to governments?
Who can say what the French want? I think obviously when you've got an arrest of the head of a service like this, that usually only happens when the service is kind of built by crime. So in the past you have had people like Ross Ulbricht for Silk Road, which is kind of the dark web where you can buy things you wouldn't be able to buy otherwise, and Kim.com for mega uploads, so kind of copyright issues. So this is when like the platform is built on a crime, but you wouldn't say that of Telegram. It's just people messaging each other. So this is kind of a whole new situation where you're arresting the guy in charge. He was in custody and then they've then charged him. But we do have a problem where Telegram falls between the moderation situation and actual end-to-end encryption. So I always thought, Telegram, like journalists do use it when there's sort of sensitive sources. They'll say, here's my Telegram, you'll be safe on there. So I thought, Telegram, that's the most secure messaging service. It's marketed as that, but it's actually not. I've just found this out. It is not end-to-end encrypted, whereas WhatsApp, Signal and Apple's iMessage are. And what that means is that any law enforcement can request to read Telegram messages, and Telegram has a choice whether to comply, whereas with WhatsApp, Signal and iMessage, it's encrypted. It's not available. So Telegram has to either choose to kind of play to its base, which is like, we want security, we don't want our messages read, we're doing possibly nefarious things, but possibly things for the good of society. And Telegram can say, great, I'm going to play to you guys, or say, hey, law enforcement, yeah, here they are. And that's where the trouble kind of lies, that it's neither one or the other, and all sorts of things are happening on that platform, which has very soft touch moderation, which moderators are not necessarily dealing with. It's not on the open web, but that's not private either. So Telegram is falling between all of these goalposts.
Well, it's sort of a second internet, effectively, isn't it, that it creates? It's almost like a sort of deep web issue.
Yes, I agree with you. It does feel like a second web where so much activity can happen and huge numbers of people can be corralled into acting, for instance, the way certain far-right people did during the riots. So it has a great amount of power and possibility, but can you prosecute on that basis, I think, is a huge question, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Rebecca? Suchandrika was talking about the Pirate Bay, for example, being built on a crime, but Telegram isn't. It's just a platform and people can use it for good and people can use it for ill. But I mean, to think of a comparison with a video sharing site like YouTube, you can upload copyrighted material to YouTube, but if you are asked to take it down, it then does become a criminal issue, doesn't it? If Google left it up there and the copyright owner said, that's mine, they need to take it down, at that point, the crime has been committed. It's not in facilitating it, it's in doing nothing about it. And so that seems quite clear, doesn't it? Telegram are doing nothing about this issue.
Yeah, I mean, Telegram does moderate public content on the public channels using criteria broadly similar to the ones that you've outlined that are used on social media more generally. It will take down copyrighted content. It will take down, illegal pornographic imagery. It will take down, all the things that you would expect on other platforms. The issue is that it doesn't moderate private chats. And as we've touched on, if your private chat can accommodate 200,000 people, at what point, I think most of us are a bit sensitive, wary of the idea of authorities being able to read person-to-person messages, private chats you're having with one or two people. But when it's communicating with 200,000 people, can we really say that that is a private conversation anymore? What Telegram does have as well, and this is where the moderation issue comes in, is it has a secret chat feature. This does use end-to-end encryption of the kind we see on WhatsApp. The vast majority of people on Telegram aren't using that private chat. I think that's actually a paid service. But the ones who are, that information cannot be accessed. The reason that Telegram doesn't share information, and it proudly says it's never shared a single byte of data with a third-party organization, is that even the ordinary private chats, these ones that aren't end-to-end encrypted, they store that data in the cloud in different countries to where it stores the decryption keys, basically what authorities would need in order to read those chats. They are always stored in separate legal jurisdictions, meaning that if law enforcement do want to get access to private data, private chats, they would need to coordinate internationally to get access. Basically, Telegram has set up a sort of obstacle course that makes it very difficult for authorities to get information out of them. And they have never to this date shared any user information. And so this probe in France now relates to Telegram's lack of cooperation into its investigations. What they're investigating is like a swathe of crimes, is drug trafficking, etc. But particularly one that I think kind of acts as a bit of a gap in the armor of the free speech movement, which is child sexual abuse imagery. So the warrant for the arrest, which was seen by Politico, accuses Durov and Telegram more broadly of complicity in possessing, distributing, offering or making available pornographic images of minors. The specific case related to a request to identify a Telegram user who solicited indecent images from underage girls and apparently also told undercover agents on Telegram that he had raped a child. They wanted to identify that user. Telegram refused to cooperate with that. And that has been a case that I think gets into one of the things that really sits at the heart of this debate, which is when you start bringing in safety of children, it's an issue where almost everyone is on the same page that, everyone is very much against the exploitation and abuse of children and agrees that they should be protected online. And that is something that free speech advocates sort of keep running into. That is the ace in the hole of authorities who are trying to make these platforms more compliant.
But why has it taken France to do something about it? I mean, they're based in Dubai, aren't they? It's not as if the UAE has the most libertarian approach to free speech. So why hasn't Dubai done something about this before France did?
Well, Durov is a French citizen. After he left Russia, he ended up getting kind of a string of citizenships. He's a UAE citizen. He's a citizen of somewhere else as well. And he's a French citizen. He became a French citizen in 2021. His name actually appears in his French passport as Paul Durov. And there's actually an interesting thing about this. His grounds for citizenship are very murky because he doesn't meet the residency requirements. The only other route to getting French citizenship is a special recognition by the French Foreign Ministry for contributing to the influence of France and the prosperity of its international economic relations. We're not quite sure how he's done that. The Foreign Ministry obviously says it doesn't comment on individual citizenship cases. So his relationship with France is kind of an odd one because on one hand he has managed to get this special status, but also Telegram is very murky, particularly in France. It's viewed very ambiguously. On one hand, it is very popular among French politicians and is part of French political life, but also it's infamous in France as it was the platform used by the terrorists coordinating the 2015 Paris attack. So France has kind of been at the center of leading this sort of closer investigation into what goes on Telegram, which obviously, does have huge implications for social media and messaging apps more generally. Telegram's official stance is it is absurd to claim the platform or its owner is responsible for the abuse of that platform. But this case raises the question of, is it?
I mean, that goes to the heart, doesn't it, Jamie, of so much of the internet. A lot of it really is platforms that mere mortals use, and the argument's always been, we're not publishers, we're facilitators.
Yeah. Elon Musk has come out and said that, he's put a hashtag of free Pavel, and I think we are getting to a stage now, particularly with social media, where things are constantly being done. You know, there's always a talk about an idea of like one super app that exists in China, but we haven't really nailed here, where you're able to do everything in your like online through one super app. And if we do move towards that,
you can get all your fake news, you can put your credit card into it. Why wouldn't you want that?
Yeah. Or you just, and it's all done through a fingerprint on your phone that you've given over to someone.
Give your fingerprint to the world's richest man. Great.
Sign me up. And people are wanting this. This is what people want for an ease of use, you know, an ability to put their face, literally scan their face, and then be able to have that. So I think we do have to have real conversations about what that looks like in terms of the future of privacy. And I think I always fall down on that idea of like, it's very easy to claim you're not a publisher until people are actually publishing stuff on your platform.
Well, this is it, Suchandrika, isn't it? I mean, for people who don't use Telegram, the implications of this on people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg is where it would get interesting for a lot of people listening to this. Do you think this could spread, that France can make a case that then can be expanded to those other more mainstream networks?
It depends which other countries come to join in with France, doesn't it? Because you have this constant kind of tension between tech being its own kind of state and actual governments in countries trying to reinforce their jurisdiction and their boundaries. As Rebecca says, they've done this smart thing with Telegram where they've kind of made an obstacle course through all these different countries, which would be very difficult for governments to prosecute unless they work together. So I think you have this age-old thing that technology is so powerful, it exists across boundaries, and it has so much money generally that it's often more powerful than governments. So I think we have to sit and watch what happens here. But I just want to add, a 200,000 Telegram group, my first thought did think that is a horrible hen-do to organise.
Well, it's when hen-dos go bad, isn't it?
So
when they suddenly
bad.
start rallying for Britain first, yeah. Well, also fundamentally, Rebecca, people talk about this stuff as if when it gets taken away, if it gets clamped down on, as, you know, some great injury to society. But we survived for years without Telegram. It's relatively new in human history. It might be that for everyone's safety and to stop the sharing of child abuse imagery and to stop people selling illicit substances and starting wars, it's a good idea for it not to be there. Simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Obviously, we've managed to survive without Telegram this long. But I do think, you know, as the ability of authoritarian regimes to use tech to monitor their citizens' activities has increased, like so too has the need for sort of a tech-based solution to that as well. And I think it's very easy to focus on all the nefarious activity that is committed on Telegram. And that is not nothing. That represents a huge chunk of what goes on there. You know, like Hamas has Telegram channels. But Telegram is a vital space for activists in authoritarian countries where other communication platforms can be banned or monitored by state actors. You know, and it raises the question of whether there is a way for platform operators to be held accountable for criminal content that's shared on their platform without essentially allowing state agencies total access to user information. Like,
Yeah, but equally, should they be held accountable for overthrowing a government? You know, I mean, from the point of view of the government and law and order in that country, if they can prove that Telegram has facilitated that, that in itself could be a crime.
yeah, I suppose from my perspective, it's a case of, yes, when it's framed as something that's vital to maintaining public order or to protecting children, it's very easy to think, oh yeah, we do need we need a final safeguard where the government can step in. But we're coming at that as people who are lucky enough to live in a democratic country where we can feel relatively confident that that won't be egregiously abused. But when it comes to places around the world where people don't enjoy that same level of freedom, it does. My concern is, should there really be no such thing as a private conversation? And when messaging services like Telegram are liable to be intercepted by government agencies, like that truly is the case. There really is nowhere for pro-democracy activists, human rights activists to have private conversations.
Apart from a room with each other with their smart speaker turned
No,
off.
that's been bugged. Everything's
With the smart
been bugged.
speaker turned off. Up next, Cheech and Chong take a hike. Jamie's into house talking weed. Next. Okay, Jamie, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Are Britain's airports going to pot?
You're under arrest. suspicion of the known concern of importation of Class B knowingly cannabis. There you do not have to say anything that may harm your defence if you do not mention when questions on it they rely on the court. And when you do so, maybe getting on the defence. Okay, I'm just going to put handcuffs on your head.
A video from the National Crime Agency showing a 40-year-old woman being arrested at Heathrow Airport on Wednesday after arriving from Toronto with 2 suitcases of cannabis. What's the story, Jamie?
Yes, it is. The amount of cannabis that's been found in suitcases at UK airports.
They're coming for you.
They're quick.
You mention
quick.
it.
Yeah. God.
Have you been buying a lot of plastic bags recently and vacuum sealant?
Absolutely, and just talking about it on Telegram the whole time. The amount of cannabis found in suitcases at UK airports has tripled in under a year. So it's gone from 5 tons in 2023 to 15 tons in 2024, or up already. So we've still got another 4 months of cannabis being seized in people's suitcases, and so it could go even higher.
Okay, so is that because we're getting better, or the National Crime Agency are getting better at noticing when people are smuggling cannabis, or is it because more cannabis is coming into the UK?
Or even officers of the National Crime Agency say that it's not just that they've got really good, it is the overproduction of the drug in countries where it has been legalised. And the chance of bigger profits in the UK market might be behind the increase. Over half of the flights are from the US, but also from other places around the world, are just being incredibly more brazen. They released an example of a Spanish national at Manchester Airport who had 8 suitcases containing 158 kilograms of cannabis arriving on a flight from Los Angeles. Just one after the other, they opened up 8 suitcases, and that was all he had. And he was jailed for 3 years and 4 months.
Who travels with 8 suitcases anyway? That's like Diana Ross.
Yeah.
So as much as anything, it's not just that the opportunity is there because it's been legalised in other nations, Suchandrika. It's also potentially, I guess, the stigma has gone. You know, if you've just been on holiday in a place where you've been smoking weed every day, maybe the person who puts a bit in their toiletries bag just sort of forgets that it's illegal in the UK, or thinks, well, they're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, so I think this thing of like travelling and different kind of regulations in different countries, maybe people do forget, maybe it's an increase in people forgetting little bits in their bag. Because basically in the UK, we have kind of a weird history with the decriminalisation of cannabis. We're kind of a bit scared of it. So at the moment, cannabis is an illegal drug for recreational use, and it's a Class B drug. It was downgraded to a Class C with reduced penalties back in 2004. Those heady days. Were we still listening to Oasis then? Great days. Landfill indie, I feel. But then they were returned to Class B in 2009 under the same Labour government. So, like, what are we doing with the legalisation of cannabis? Like, we're kind of quite scared of it.
One time, of course, has been legalised for medical use in this country, hasn't it? Just in the last few years. It
has, yeah. And then even that is kind of notionally available under the NHS, but in reality you're unlikely to get it. You'll need to go to private clinics. So again, we want to seem cool and legalise it, but in reality we're far too scared. And it looks like Keir Starmer's Labour will not be touching it at all. I mean, in terms of legalising it, I cannot speak for their downtime. Yeah.
Do you accept that analysis, Rebecca? We're not cool enough? Or is it just that there are warnings that get delivered to UK governments from people who've had experiences of schizophrenia or paranoia and say, these are the reasons why you don't want to legalise it. You can tolerate it, but it's not a good idea to encourage more people to have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this story really highlights how much the UK is increasingly against the grain of sort of the global shift. You know, even Thailand has legalised cannabis. You know, obviously Southeast Asia not known for their lax stance on drugs ordinarily. And we really are at odds with the way the country's going. And apparently, according to the NCA, that is one of the things that they see is that drug mules, especially people who aren't British nationals and are being used to bring cannabis into the UK illegally, they are told that they will only get fined if they're caught. And the reason I think that people are willing to believe that is that the UK's laws do seem so much harsher than what you're seeing, especially in, you know, sort of the US, Commonwealth countries. Canada's legalised weed. We are increasingly becoming, you know, very much standing out in terms of the harshness of our policy towards it. And yeah, I do think that a lot of it is to do with we don't have a cool stoner archetype, we don't have a community of people who identify themselves as pot smokers. You know, the statistics are that around 2 million people recreationally use cannabis, but out of those, how many of them make that the big part of their personality and would be willing to become public advocates of decriminalisation? You know, surveys show that the majority of Brits do support cannabis being decriminalised or legalised. But I do think the vast majority of that support is passive. And that means that politicians don't really have a stake in making it happen either, because there just isn't that active support there. I think if you think about the US, you've got this, you do have stereotypes of, the feckless, useless stoner, but you've also got really strong, cool stoner figures. You've got like the California surfer or like the Willie Nelson cowboy type stoner. Where here, you picture weed. I think it's partly the fact that it's illegal means that most people doing it are doing it semi-privately. I mean, not if you walk through a park in London, but there is at least an effort to be semi-covert about it. So the person that's doing it in public is probably not representative of the vast majority of recreational smokers. It's the person who really doesn't care at all. So you think of it as being something a bit sketchy, a bit kind of like, ugh. They are still seen as a bit of an oddball minority. And that kind of means that the political impetus isn't really there either.
Well, it was well argued, Jamie. I don't know if you'd agree what Rebecca just said. It did sound like bullshit to me. I mean, I feel like the reasons that it hasn't changed in the last 15 years is because we've had a Conservative government, and clues in the name. I know they equalise marriage and stuff, but I just feel like legalising cannabis was never going to be something a Tory government would do. I am interested in why it isn't something that a Labour government might look at if Suchandrika's analysis is right, because younger people, if you surveyed them, would say that they think it's time for that to change. Progressive people generally would probably agree with that too. So why is there not that political impetus now?
Well, I think two things. I didn't know we were allowed to swear on this podcast. That's pretty cool.
Swearing?
It is.
I think it's possible.
I wouldn't say it to a child.
Don't start effing and jeffing, please.
I think there's two things. I think one, I think I probably agree with your assessment that the Conservatives pitched their entire manifesto and vote-winning policies at a group of quickly decrepit elderly people who aren't ever going to be the type of people that are interested in drug decriminalisation for lots of reasons, but particularly also because they're generally quite scared of young people. I think part of the reason that Labour are worried about it is that, one, they have this kind of like Ming Vase political strategy where they didn't really want to rock the boat too much. So I think we could see a bit of a change on it. I think the pressure will come from parties like the Lib Dems, who have been quite vocal about their cannabis reform policies because of the money, basically, the money side of it. I mean, you only have to look at Germany, obviously went for a legalization light policy earlier. They had a study that suggested a commercial market could create 27,000 jobs in Germany and be worth about 4.7 billion euros annually. And at a time when we need money in this country, it does seem to make sense from that perspective. I guess there's another question of, if you do want to license cannabis, I think there's a slippery slope problem that once you start licensing cannabis, then there is a question about why don't we do this for all drugs? Because, the UK has one of the highest drug deaths in Europe, particularly Scotland, where I am currently, has one of the highest drug death problems. And one of the main arguments that advocacy groups make is that criminalisation doesn't work of drugs.
But we do have a problem with overcrowded prisons, don't we, Suchandrika? If you said overnight that people who are in there for dealing small amounts of weed or for possessing weed for recreation were no longer in prison, that would make an enormous difference to the, footfall.
Yes, we do. And I think that's probably the best argument for decriminalisation, isn't it? Is that you have people put in prison or go in their criminal record, and they're around other people who have committed far worse crimes. And does that then make it easier for people inside to think, well, I don't know what my prospects are on the outside, but maybe I will look at what opportunities I have in here. If we could find other ways to deal with people using cannabis on a recreational level, then should we not look at that? Surely, and also it would save money, right? Few people going into the prison system.
But also, it's not as if there isn't a use case example, Rebecca. There's Canada. What can we learn from looking at other countries?
Well, I think actually one thing that we can learn from countries where cannabis production has been legalised is that there is a huge appeal to the ordinary recreational smoker of knowing that those drugs have come from a place where they have been grown in controlled circumstances according to, regulations, that the production is being monitored, because the NCA's stance is that legally cultivated cannabis is not necessarily better and stronger than that which is produced illicitly here in the UK. They say the THC content is relatively similar, which is possibly true, but I know that in terms of whether legally cultivated cannabis is better, if not stronger, I know that one thing that has always put me off is not knowing where it would have come from and knowing people who have smoked weed that turned out to be contaminated or laced with other drugs. So I 100% see the appeal in buying weed that, even if it's been illegally brought to the UK, has been legally cultivated in the US or Canada or wherever it is. I think a lot of people are put off from engaging with the drugs trade because they know it's connected to so much misery and crime on a global level. So, whether it's a slippery slope to legalizing more drugs, I think is up for debate. I would personally say it not necessarily based on what we've seen in other countries, but I would certainly say that it would increase the readiness of people in the UK to experiment with or to recreationally use cannabis, and that may not be something that the government wants to encourage either.
Quick glossary on THC, by the way. That is the substance that's mainly responsible for the effects of marijuana on a person's mental state, isn't it? So that's the bit you don't want, basically.
Oh, yeah, I thought everyone knew that from that bit in the Gogglebox intro where the girl goes, "That's what gets you stoned."
Jamie, you've chosen this as your story of the week. What do you think the momentum here is? What do you think is going to happen next?
I think what's interesting is that the kind of increased number of people being stopped and the fact that the NCA have decided to put out a press release and create a news story about this now this week comes at the same time that police data has shown that the number of offences for possession of cannabis has fallen. It was 160,733 in 2010, and then at the end of the last decade it had dropped by 50-odd thousand, and then less than a quarter of those offences actually went on to see the offender being charged. So in many cases it feels like police are not considering cannabis possession to be a serious crime. And the way that the NCA wrote up this press release and turned it into a news story was more of like, isn't this mental that these people are coming in? Like it was quite a kind of eye-catching press release. I do feel like there is a kind of growing decriminalisation by the backdoor movement. A lot of the Labour police and crime commissioners are saying that we don't have the kind of manpower and are supporting alternatives for criminal convictions for cannabis, so diversion schemes that kind of freeing up police resources. So I do think those two things aren't quite coherent in one way, but I do think we probably are moving towards a situation where maybe we do see in like 5 to 10 years' time it is decriminalised, or it's just kind of, it was decriminalised but not officially, I guess.
Okay, we'll find out what story Suchandrika has illicitly stuffed into her suitcase after this. Suchandrika, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Are we in for a load of boring art coming our way?
So the Open Fund is an incubator for all of the Scottish work that's at the Fringe and all Scottish art festivals, and without it there might still be festivals, but there might not be anything to see. This week, Creative Scotland, who are the funding body in Scotland, they've been forced to close this fund and will close it at 2 p.m. on Friday the 30th of August. It will be closed indefinitely due to the Scottish Government being unable to confirm a release of £6.6 million that was promised. Wiping out this fund removes a lifeline for the freelance artists of Scotland, and many artists are already saying that they have to leave, they can't sustain themselves in this culture.
Actor Gavin John Wright giving a speech at the end of a performance at Summer Hall in Edinburgh. Funding cuts to the arts, Suchandrika. A hardy perennial. But what's happened this week?
So this week, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival ended, and there was an open letter written by the chief executive of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society. She's called Shona McCarthy, and she said that we're in for some very boring art if these cuts to public funding for the arts go ahead. And,
what cuts?
Well, in Scotland, there's a specific fund that's been cut, and it's Creative Scotland. They have a fund where individual artists can go and get funds and work on their art, but now that is being cut, and so individuals have been protesting with the hashtag No Art Without Artists.
Presumably that was a Scottish government decision. What was the reason they gave for cutting the fund?
So the Scottish government says this budget is under pressure because they're constraining all but essential spending that helps to pay for public sector pay deals.
I mean, so that's across the piece, isn't it, Jamie? I mean, you said earlier you're in Scotland at the moment. Those are genuinely difficult decisions that are being made by the government across the country at the moment. People get upset when things are cut, particularly when it affects their livelihood. But if they were in a position of power, they too would have to make a decision about which pots of money to keep and which to invest in.
Yeah, I think, though, it comes within the context of the last 15 to 20 years when there has been a noticeable move away from celebrating the art that is created in this country. You only have to look at the backing that the BBC continues to fail to receive from lots of different quarters and yet that's one of the biggest money earners that we have in terms of our cultural funding and in terms of the soft power that the UK owns. So I think I was reading an interesting article in the Art Critic talking about a lot of the private funders for arts leaving the country, mainly some to do with Brexit, mainly to do with like new non-dom policies, and they're taking that money out of what they used to do in terms of art funding. And one of the commentary pieces in it was basically saying that obviously, while it's difficult to feel sorry for multi-billionaires, there is a feeling that if they look around and they see that, a lot of hasn't been a funding and not very much backing in the last 15 years for these cultural institutions, they kind of feel like, why should we fund it? If you as a government don't value the cultural stuff that your country is creating, why should you then turn to us to then give huge amounts of money over? Because there is no benefit for us in terms of what we get out of it. I think it is a kind of a mindset shift that needs to happen in this country to celebrate, and that's, I guess, is what the Fringe, Shona McCarthy is trying to say in terms of this concept of boring art. But we do have to have a real think about where's the focus when it comes to arts funding, and what do we want out of art.
What does boring art mean to you, Rebecca?
Well, I mean, I guess go down to your local multiplex if you still have one, and you'll see it. I think cinema is one of the really obvious places where we see that it's properties based on tried and trusted franchises, adaptations of popular books. Look at the West End, where profit margins are even tighter. The rise of the jukebox musical, it all reflects a lack of risk on one hand from the people producing the art. They want to guarantee a reliable return, but also audiences, who are also feeling reluctant, cost of living concerns, reluctant to spend money on unknown quantities either. And so you end up with an art scene that's very much dominated by things that are trusted to bring in a certain revenue rather than things that are a bit more experimental or even sort of moderately challenging. And I think what this does is kind of create a two-tier system where you have a very thin veneer of glitzy, glamorous, money-making ventures. If you look at something like Taylor Swift's Eras tour, at this point, that's basically its own multimedia empire. It's got its merchandise, it's got a spin-off film. You've got events like Glastonbury, but at the same time, underneath, you've got this vast mass of creatives who are struggling more than ever in what is an increasingly precarious landscape. Small music venues are closing up and down the country, and musicians are finding it harder and harder to turn their art into a day job. And I think that's obviously always been the case. Most of us are drawn to at least one of the arts, and obviously only a very small minority of people are going to be good enough to make a living out of it. But that is getting harder and harder. And part of the reason is, sort of as we've touched on, a lot of those funding pathways are being cut off, not only for adults trying to make a career in the arts, but also we've seen huge cuts to arts education in schools. So really the route is being cut off too. And it means that the only young people that are getting access to that kind of early years exposure to the arts are people who are either being sent to private schools where there's better arts provision, or people who have families who can afford to pay for extracurricular exposure to those things. So really it is like all the way down the pipeline, the opportunities and the funding are being reduced drastically.
But just to challenge that barrier to entry idea, Suchandrika, a little bit, because of social media apps and because of podcasting, it is actually possible to practice your art with no money behind you and see if you reach an audience and find out if there's people that are interested in what you're doing. That's easier than it's ever been before. You don't need to go to Edinburgh and do a show. You just need to do a compelling TikTok.
Cool, yeah. So somebody's just taken a show to Edinburgh answering this question. So I went for 2 weeks, and I'd say yes, of course, there is TikTok, and I love to talk about TikTok. They're kind of two different things though, aren't they? So if you are recording sketches for TikTok, they're pre-recorded, they go out, and then you wait for the likes to roll in. You're waiting a long time for some of us, and you're waiting for the eyeballs. But when you're taking a live show, you're getting that immediate feedback, stand-up, immediate feedback. I was there I did 10 shows, and I had little props and things like that, and every day I changed up what I did with them to experiment with the audience and see what they reacted to. Those are two different ways of providing a performance. I'm not here to say which one is better or worse, but one is to a remote audience and one is the audience right in front of you. So it depends on what people want. And as Rebecca mentioned with the Taylor Swift Eras tour, there is something about, and with Oasis as well, there's something about a live performance that we do still enjoy, that our phones don't give us, and that people are still willing to go and pay money for or not. There are lots of free shows at Edinburgh as well. But in terms of what it can do for a career, I think that is definitely changing in terms of what the Fringe is and how important it is. But I will say that in terms of like having money and backing, you pay to play really a lot at Edinburgh Fringe. I was in a venue where I did not have to pay. They'll take the money, 20% off my ticket sales. So that's a really good deal for a performer, and it's the reason I could go. There are other venues where people are paying tens of thousands of pounds to be in that venue. They'll probably get a guaranteed audience, they'll probably sell out, but then they owe this venue a lot of money. So money is still the kind of deciding factor, even at Edinburgh, and even more so now.
So then you have to ask, Jamie, why are they doing it? And often the answer to that question is sort of marketing, really. They're doing it so they can have a sellout Edinburgh, so they can tell people they had a sellout Edinburgh, and they can get a meeting and try and get the show transferred, or, you know, get their Netflix series or whatever it is that they're looking for. And if that's the aim, and of course it isn't for everybody, but if it is, why on earth should the government be subsidising that?
I think that's the question is that and I think probably my answer to that is actually the funding needs to go to arts education and creating the conditions for something like the Fringe to emerge, rather than supporting the people who are already established or supporting the people that are already making money out of it. I was at the Fringe like last week, and what you realise is how many of the link-ups are like across the country now. So a lot of, like you're talking about, a lot of TV people are going to Edinburgh to try and find the next thing to give a show to. A lot of, you know, someone like the Soho Theatre, if you're looking to move your show down to London, there'll be people there that are organising that kind of stuff. There's a kind of a natural worry about commercialization and about sponsorship, and and we've discussed previously about how things like art washing and things like that. But I think it's a kind of like a quid pro quo thing for people involved at the Fringe, where it's like, if you want to make a commercial success of it, you probably do also have to embrace some of the commercial sides of this, and not be too afraid of the snobbery, I guess, to not be too afraid of the snobbery that sometimes comes with, are you doing art that's for everyone, or are you doing art that's just for yourself?
But on that corporate sponsorship question, Rebecca, I mean, Jamie's right, we have discussed it before, but it's worth mentioning again, isn't it, in this context? There are artists that were being supported by funds that, for reasons of wokery, for want of a better phrase, people said you cannot take that endorsement because they're backing fossil fuels, or they have a policy around the Middle East that we don't agree with. I mean, that is money that was there. Should artists be taking that money if the policy is take the money but do whatever you want, have creative freedom?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of conversation about how the notion of being a sellout and selling out is something that was really rooted in kind of a Gen X attitude, and that millennials and Gen Z don't necessarily see that the same way. And I think that is because of the way that the pathways into a cultural career and through a cultural career have changed significantly. So for instance, if you think about kind of the classic pathway that you go and perform at Edinburgh Fringe, and then you're spotted by someone, they offer you a job maybe at the BBC or at ITV, and then you're sort of in, you've got a sketch show that millions of people will watch because there aren't many things to watch on TV. And once you're in, you're sort of guaranteed, you're like in the system. As long as you don't do anything horribly wrong, you'll probably be handed another TV show, or you'll get a spot as on a radio show as a regular contributor, and then that's you kind of set for life. And I think the way that those avenues have sort of shifted significantly. Now it's like, okay, so you're spotted by someone from a TV channel, but young people don't watch TV, so it's more likely that you're going to be offered maybe a partnership deal to do something on TikTok. And I think for an older generation of creatives, that sounds pretty soulless and rubbish. But the point is that for young people coming up in the arts these days, those sort of preset pathways into a very homogenous culture, very mainstream culture that everyone is participating in, that just doesn't exist anymore. So for younger people coming up now, they have to take their opportunities where they can get them. And I do think for those generations, the notion that doing sponsorships, doing brand partnerships is akin to selling out or is something to be looked down on, that has pretty much entirely disappeared. Okay, talking bums on seats, Suchandrika, I'm just curious. What was your best night? What was your worst night? Give me a number.
So I was in a beautiful little yurt. And when we say night, it was 3 p.m. I had double figures of people almost every day. I also had one person on the last day, and she was a very nice lady, so we just sat down and had a chat. But I've never had a one audience before, so Goodness. I feel like tick. I was thinking that show would be pulled. Like on the Sunday, the Monday, it sounds like some people might be doing Tuesday. People are not turning up at that point. It's very much the end of the Fringe. But the average Fringe audience is 4 to 6 people, as I've been told. So I was thrilled. That's amazing.
Okay. Wow.
Guys, this is a Fringe show. We've got one here.
Yeah, we've got one here.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're actually going on tour, the four of us.
Yeah. Only with state subsidies, though. That is it. Thank you for listening. It's our curtain call now. You are permitted to take flash photography at this time. My thanks to Rebecca, Jamie, and Suchandrika. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts. Then tap follow. Easy. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.